So let's have a look at the top-down RPG template. I might have overdone it a bit with the grass, so if you're getting warning that there's too much grass, well, I might have exaggerated a bit. Anyway, just remove some grass. I assume you're gonna have a different terrain anyway. So let's get started with the intro screen, which is the character select screen. So I'm going to go to user interfaces, and then we'll select character select. There we go. So I'm going to hit play mode, and I'm going to explain what actually happens when you press on one of these characters. And just to be clear, you don't actually press on an actual physical character. There's just a UI element here. So what actually happens when you press one of these? So first things first, you're not changing a player, so it's not a different active player or anything like that. When we go to our player, let me collapse all of these things. At the top, we'll have a couple of variables: warrior, hunter, mage. Basically, these are the classes, which means that when we load up warrior, there will be a couple of actions that will make sure we get him and all of the accompanying skills that follow. When we select hunter or mage, it will load a different character model and different skills as well. So the way this works, when we go to our user interface and character select, we select our warrior, it will change animation state on the character itself, which is nice. That lasts for 2 seconds, and then it will assign the class to warrior. It will set all of these inactive, and it will execute these actions. So these actions are the warrior stats. I will go through how these stats work in a bit as well. And basically it just sets these stats. You can change all of this to whatever you want. These are just starting stats. Get creative, do what you like. And these stats are different for different classes, and that's pretty much it. Then we have our intro actions. So on start, we load up these actions, which basically just puts the player in the variable pool. But on top of that, once we press this button and that bool gets assigned, we load these actions, and basically it determines what happens to the player. So the player will walk, he'll equip an inventory item which we add at the same time, and it will make him controllable, of course, move to a marker, etc., etc. And he will draw this weapon. Now, to avoid any confusion, the weapon models and the melee weapon object are separate from each other. So there's only one warrior melee object, which has a couple of different attacks, but as you can see, there's only one simple action object. And the reason for that is, in order for a loot game like this would be, or if it's Diablo, Skyrim, doesn't matter, you can have different sword models. The animations for the sword will always remain the same. Diablo goes a bit further, and most of the I'm pretty sure all of the weapon animations are the same for, if you would have the same class, doesn't really matter what you equip. And that goes here as well. So if we select the warrior, and I'm doing the warrior simply because it just has more objects pre-made, so it's just a bit easier to see what happens. So we have these left-right skills here. This is important, I'll go over this as well. We have mana. As you can see, it's not refilling, and we need to basically hit an enemy. Oh, can't see anything with the leaves. And it gets refilled, and it slowly drains. This is the mana that is required to use this skill, and if we don't use it, just like in Diablo with the Barbarian, it slowly diminishes, and maybe a bit fast, but you can change all of that, of course. Now, those actions are determined by class as well. Basically, when we lock down, and you can find these objects basically here, these characters. Just a little highlight. Let's pick warrior. They're all here in the scene. So this is what gets loaded. It's just a different camera view that is displayed in that menu. So let's go back to the menus a bit and let's check our HUD. And because this is a priority, it will always be on top. So I'm going to deselect it for now. And as you can see, our HUD doesn't have all of the elements. So this icon is not visible and these entire buttons are not visible. And that's because that gets loaded the moment we actually select a character. So I'm going to put play mode here next to us, just so you can see what happens. And we already saw what the warrior looks like, so I'm just going to select something else now. So if I select the mage, we have these black bars that come up first, of course, and you will see different icons and even a different image for the mage, different model, and all of that, well, pretty much everything gets decided, gets instantiated or becomes visible when we actually select a character. And that character, all it does again is just select a bool on the player. So as you might imagine, pretty much most of the basic mechanics when it comes to which weapons drop when you kill an enemy, which skills you can perform, it all depends on those bools. And there's a couple of reasons I did this. One, it will be really Jesus. There's a couple of reasons I did this. For one, it will be really easy to add multiple different classes. So if you want to go full Diablo and have, I don't know, 7, 8, I have no idea how many there are, you can easily add this. Just add a couple of bools and add those bool conditions to introduce more classes. It's also a lot easier that you're always able to reference the same player that is in the scene, that is always active. Things can get a bit messy if you swap out different player prefabs. So instead of doing any of that, just having the same prefab that basically just decides its actions based on these bools is just a lot easier. So let's have a look a bit at how all of this happens. So we have our HUD, of course. The HUD has just the basic elements for all of our stats. So for level, health, that's the same how it pretty much always works. The interesting here is our skills. So these skills, as you can see, a bunch of variables here as well, which are the different skills. So we have attack 1 and 2, which are these two, which are right now not visible. Skill 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and this should have been 5, I'm pretty sure. Anyway, oh no, that's skill 2 as well. Interesting. So when we go to our triggers here, we have class select. So what happens when a variable changes? So in this case, when we select our warrior class, we have these clauses. So if warrior is true, then these objects become active and these get assigned to our variables. So these are the variables we have stored here, and it basically just assigns objects to these variables and activates them. So if mage, and these are the same conditions by the way, just different triggers, but all the same conditions, it will activate different objects. So the triggers for when you actually press something, so when you actually press on 1 or 2 or 3 or 4, all they do is literally activate the actions of that variable. So, you know, this kind of makes it a lot easier to control how you activate and can manage all of these skills. So let's see where I actually put those. That might be useful as well. There we go. So we have our skills. So this is skill 1, 2, 3, 4. And we have attack 1 and 2. Now attack 1 and 2, because this is a Diablo type game and it's all about mouse input, are managed differently, which I'll highlight as well. But the skills, so these 4, are just normal key down, so 1, 2, 3, 4. And what they do is, let's pick 2 because that's one that actually changes. It activates the actions of that variable that is set when we select our class. Now there's a bit more to this because we can also swap out skills, for example. So if we check 1, it does the same thing, and this is something that in the template I actually have swappables for this. So it executes the actions for skill 1 that are here. So this is skill 1. By default, that's general increase attack. And if we have a look at our, not our HUD, but our skills menu. So our skills menu has the same class conditions again, which just, what is true? Did we select warrior or did we select mage, etc., etc.? So if we select warrior, this becomes active. And let's activate these for a moment. And then, depending on the class, you'll see different skills. Now, what happens when we press these buttons, so skill 1 and 2? Our general skill 1 gets filled in with these actions. And icons as well, by the way. So when we press on one of these buttons, it basically enters that variable that we had in our HUD here. So these variables. And when we would select this one, for example, skill 2, it literally enters the value from different actions. So we have these actions for increase, these actions for, this was a health buff, and this was a damage buff. So that's literally all it does. So as you can see, sword damage goes up, and with these, it adds vitality, so we have more health for the moment. So it's just that changes. And they get activated in our HUD literally based on, that variable. So the moment this variable becomes active, we have this icon as well. So as you can see, I chose to do this just because it's slightly easier. So you can just duplicate if you want another one, and we can have, I have no idea what, but basically you can just pick a different, I shouldn't have put that up, so I want to make sure I still remember which one was the original. So we can have a different icon here, which this is a horrible icon, by the way, and it shouldn't be here. But as you can see, that's literally just how it works. So when we press this button, it will enter this variable and activate the appropriate skill, which also allows it to display a different icon. And you can just choose what the actions are for when you press this button. And that's literally all there is to it. So I'm going to remove this again, as this skill doesn't make a lot of sense. Now it becomes a bit more interesting when we actually have, attack skills. So for example, what happens when we actually press 2 and we have a skill that actually does something actively. So in the case of the warrior, that would be strike. As you can see, mage is teleport, and hunter is a different type of attack. So if strike is active, again, all functions exactly the same as every other skill. There's no difference. But what it really does is that we just have these set of actions. So again, all of the actions are literally on the object, and that object gets filled in with the variable that is decided based on the skill. It might sound a bit complex, but it's actually pretty simple once you figure out how it works, and you'll see that it's a really easy system to expand upon. So you can easily add a lot more skills, more classes, and you'll mostly just be duplicating items, and that's pretty much all there is to it. So yeah, that's how it works with skills. When it comes to quests, there's no difference between classes. The quests are still the same. When it comes to inventory, there's no difference except for the name that populates here, and the stats that populate here are decided again with the starting stats, so right from the start, and that's it. They're the same stats objects, they just have different values. So that's all inventory really does when it comes to the different classes we select. Now when it comes to the different inventory items, that's slightly different. That all works with the loot drop system. So I'm going to show how that works as well. It's there we go, I was looking for that. It's actually pretty interesting. It's a system you can easily change as well. So let's go to one of our enemies, and I'm going to turn off that 2D view. And that actually works the same with these dead people lying around in play mode, where you click on them and they drop loot. It uses the same loot drop system. So let me look up, and I'm going to highlight these options as well. So all of the player attack options are on the enemy, but they all use the same conditions, by the way, so they don't have their own conditions. Just the triggers. On attribute change death. So when an enemy dies, it sets a bool to dead. It adds some experience. It will release the target on the player as well, which is quite useful, and it will call the loot drop conditions. So loot drop conditions, in this case, will check the class of the player again, so that's the same variable. So execute actions, and then it will execute one of these actions. Now let's focus on that, because that's the more interesting part. So all of our, let me collapse all of this actually. So all the loot drop conditions are here, so pretty easy to find in the hierarchy. So we have the warrior drop, mage drop, and hunter drop. As you can see, these are filled, so items, different items, and you can check out what all of these items are, and they will instantiate, you know, inventory items. That's literally what they do, coins, etc., etc. We also have no drop, so nothing happens, and that was actually an easiest way to do this. And as you can see, there's a lot of no drop, which basically just you know, decreases the chance you actually get something. Gold drop is in there quite a bit more as well, because there should be a higher chance of getting gold rather than an item. And if you think the drop rate is still too high, just, you know, add more. Go to 50 in this list and just drag in no drop, and that's literally all you have to do. Now I'm using different list variables for warrior, mage, hunter, because personally it always annoyed me in Diablo that I got, you know, weapons for a class I'm not using and I couldn't use them. I just don't really see the point in that. I mean, you know, that's just crap you want to sell. Maybe I haven't played enough and I just didn't get it, but I always found it a bit strange. So that's why the loot drop conditions we drop on health decide what to execute based on a variable. If you don't want that, just remove the condition here of warrior and just have one list variable, and it will drop random loot from any class you want. So, you know, that's your option, and the way it does it, it executes the actions from the list variable, in this case warrior, because we have warrior, and it selects a random one. and that's how loot drops become random. So when we click on our dead body here, it uses the exact same loot drop conditions, so it's just no different. So again, exact same conditions, just copied over, and it will randomly pick one of those loot items, and that's literally how loot works. So pretty simple. So let's get over to enemies and the attack conditions. So what actually happens when you press on an enemy or hover over an enemy with your mouse, and I want to highlight hover as well. There we go. So every enemy, because they have a character controller, has a, the character controller functions as a collider in this case. So that means we can also use on mouse enter when we enter the collider with our mouse, which literally just changes the material. Now if you want something different, you have some nice shaders, or you want to use the highlight effect from one of the Game Creator action packs, you can just add that action here. And then once we do on mouse exit, it just returns the the default material, and that's it. So pretty simple when it comes to the highlight actions. Now, as you can see, there are no attack items here, so despite the triggers being here, because they have to be here, all of the attack conditions are the same. So you can have 1000 enemies in your screen. I don't have 1000, but I have a lot of them. The attack conditions are located with all of the other skills. So I wanted to group that together. Might not necessarily make sense, but I thought it was quite useful to make sure they're all together. But yeah. So the attack conditions, and then we can close up the enemy again, because now it's not related to the enemy anymore. Does the same, so it all depends which clause you are using, what will happen. So you'll have a lot of clauses here, and that all depends just on the clause. So we have warrior active. If the distance to the invoker is less than 2, he will perform these actions. If the distance is higher, he will first walk to that character. Now if you have a mage, and mage condition, and the range is 20, we're not going to move anywhere, so the move condition is literally under the player. That's just to make sure we're actually standing still, we're close to as possible. And then we're using the shooter module to shoot a fireball. And this is what it's attaching here, is literally the cosmetic fireball. It's the character is constantly holding in its hand. And we're just shooting. Same goes for the hunter. It's just shooting. And the same goes for the attack 2 conditions, so they function literally exactly the same. The actions are different, but again, it's just selecting which character you have and the requirement of mana. So because you also consume mana once you use that skill, so there's a mana requirement. You can change all of those values, of course. Can change all of the actions and just do something entirely different. But that's pretty much how it works. So when it comes to left click or right click, it basically functions the same, just different actions and a slightly different requirement. Now I did the same clause conditions to mana as well in the bar. So as you could see in the beginning, the warrior didn't automatically regain, it was actually automatically reducing mana. Rather than filling up. That's different per class as well. So if we have a warrior, it's automatically subtracting. If we have a mage or hunter, it's automatically adding. Diablo did the same, so I thought I'd copy over that mechanic. So yeah, that's pretty similar. Level up works the same as in the default template. It's just on level increase, and we'll play an animation. Now if you don't want this gesture, because in combat it might be annoying and you know, you don't want a gesture in combat, just remove the gesture and remove the weight. Other than that, on the player, we have, you know, our default game creator conditions for damage. When it comes to damage, all of the damage is based on a variable. Same goes for the player as well as the enemy, so we're using variables to deal all of our damage. These can be found in NPC damage, and I'm only using sword damage for the RPG template. So even the magical fireballs and arrows are using sword damage. Should have maybe renamed sword damage to something else, but you know. So yeah, so there's no fixed things. That's why these stats can all influence these values. And that's the next thing I want to highlight, how stats work. So we have a couple of stats, and I'm going to highlight this in 2D because that's slightly easier. Let's open up our inventory. There we go. And these values get based on when we actually select a class. So rather than doing this, let's actually just hit play mode and let's select a class. So I'm going to open up inventory just like I said before. And it's not really opening it up. There we go. Just took a bit longer. So we have these stat values, and you know, using let's go out of pause mode. Dragging in this will change these stats, as you can see. So when we have all of these things equipped, and we have these axes equipped as well, you'll see that dexterity reaches a level of 20, and by default dexterity is I think 30. Yeah. So what actually happens when we change all of these things? So all of that work, all of those changes work here. So we have our stat change trigger. So we have on start, they get called, and these are the same conditions, just to be absolutely clear. And when we change stats, what happens as well? So as you can see, we have dexterity change and strength. Now, wisdom literally is mana, so that just increases the mana value. Nothing's exciting there. Vitality, same, that's health, so it just increases your health. Damage speaks for itself. But we also have strength and dexterity. Now those stats also need to do something. So they do. So as you can see, we have tons of different clauses, and you can add more if you want. You can add formulas as well. But the way it works, so if dexterity is greater or equal to 40, this is our run speed. If dexterity is greater or equal to 20, this is our run speed. So the higher your dexterity, the higher your run speed. So, I mean, that's literally what it does. So this is a way to make sure, you know, all of these values actually do something. So pretty simple, pretty straightforward. Same happens with stats, with strength. So the higher your strength, the higher our sword damage is going to be. So strength will influence our sword damage. Now you will see some actions like skill 1 that temporarily just increase, you know, add a value to our sword damage variable, which is completely fine. That's just a temporary effect. So it doesn't really matter if you increase strength or damage, but it's just more precise if you use damage. Now overall, increasing strength will increase your damage output. I might have exaggerated a tiny bit, so you know, it goes from 5 to 25, which is quite a big difference. But it's a really good and fun way to make sure that your game actually has some character progression, and that better loot actually has an effect. So yeah, thought it was pretty interesting to do. And I mean, there's obviously going to be more to it, but those are a lot of the basic things I just wanted to highlight. I just wanted to explain. So hope you enjoyed it, and I'll see you in the next one.